Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Welcome back to Geeks Reads. Today I want to talk about the book Bookshops and Bonedust by Travis Baldree, which you will see here. This book is a prequel to Legends and Lattes. Very similar vein, but it takes place several years before that book. Legends and Lattes is basically Liv at the end of her career wanting to retire from the mercenary life. She's an orc fighter, and in real life wants to open up, a coffee shop, more or less. This is Liv basically on her first, maybe first adventure, career as a mercenary, but definitely very early in her career. She's strong, a good fighter, but still not somewhat inexperienced in how to conduct herself as part of a group. Minor spoilers for the first chapter or two, and possibly for the rest of the book. She is injured in an early campaign through to her own basic stupidity, not paying attention to her surroundings or what her team is doing. Gets herself injured pretty badly, and is forced to rest and recuperate. She wakes up in a tavern in a room that's been paid for by the leader of her mercenary company for a certain period of time, saying they'll pick her up on the way back through from the current mission. And so she's stuck there in a town that she doesn't know, with nobody there she knows, while she recuperates. She was stabbed through the leg with a spear, completely through, very badly injured, trying to hobble her way through this town on a crutch. And she winds up meeting some people, making some friends, yada yada yada. Because it's a prequel, somewhat where this is going to go. She's not going to die because it's a prequel. This book is more action oriented than the first one, which I guess makes sense because it's during her career as a mercenary. The first book I enjoyed very much, but it was also very slow and much more character driven. There was very little action. Stakes were personal and small. They may have been large for Liv as a character, but beyond that, the stakes were more personal and only large because they would, affect her, how she was planning on living out her retirement. The stakes in this book actually feel higher, even though the fact that we know she's not going to die, and it's more action packed. Not hugely action packed. There's actually very little. I mean, the opening sequence is a battle, but I mean, a good chunk of the book is mostly just her trying to recover and keep from getting too bored. As you see here on the cover of the book, she is sitting next to a small furry creature with like a cat-like face or something like that, in a red cloak. I think they're called ratkins, is their general species. She's chomping on a muffin in what appears to be a library or a bookstore, probably a bookstore because it says Bookshops, and looks like a baby owlbear from D&D. It's not. It's called a griffet, but that's what it reminds me of. A little, hybrid animal with like an owl's face. And obviously, she gets, she meets the person who runs a bookshop. Being an orc warrior, not much use for reading. That's where a lot of the I guess comedy comes in. It's her in this bookshop, meeting the person who owns the bookshop, and her little pet griffet thing there. How much do I spoil? I mean, I've given away the basic premise of the book. I guess that's pretty much enough. There's not anything on the back cover. Yeah, there's other stuff. I don't want to spoil any of the eventual things. Um, you know, chomping on the muffin has she meets the person who runs the bakery. The people who run the tavern that she's forced to stay at. Some of the other people in town, captain of the guards. Um, in comparing it to the first book, I do think it's a little more tightly written. And I think the first book meandered a bit as much as I enjoyed it. This book is much more, I don't want to say concise, but I mentioned it's more tightly written. But yeah, the story beats are, shit, I've said it, it's tighter. Uh, Whereas I felt the first book kind of, wasted some space. There were, it wasn't bad, but it felt like a first book. This is tighter, feels like a second book, a person who's got more experience writing under his belt. So there is that. And I did enjoy it. I did enjoy it at least as much as I enjoyed the first one, and possibly more. It's hard to compare the two since I read the book like a year ago, I think. But if you like the first book, you would like this one. The tone is very similar. It's, the first book, an orc mercenary retiring to run a coffee shop. That's a cute premise. It's funny. This is, an orc in a bookshop, an orc mercenary in a bookshop. Similar premise, similar story beats, a bit more action, but still cute and fun. And that's not heavy, it's not deep. It's just a fantasy, adventure book. So I liked it. I'd recommend it if you like the first book, or even if the premise sounds interesting. It's still a good read. One of the things I do want to mention is that because I'm a giant nerd, I did read the acknowledgments. I do occasionally do that. And I enjoyed reading this because the author, Travis Baldree, talks about the fact that, when he got the contract for their first book, he also had a contract for two, gave him a contract for two books, the first book and another one. And he details what he wanted his second book to be. He talks about it's like, a fantasy murder mystery. The characters, his main character and his assistant, his main character, like this brilliant wizard who was passed over for a position at a prestigious wizard university or something like that. So they retired the countryside with their assistant, and the plot of the book is that 10 years after, they're asked to come back to solve the murder of the man who took their place at the university, who got the job they wanted. Whole story outline. I'm like, man, this sounds really interesting. And it's like, yeah, and I showed it, and the book, it was awful. It was horrible. I hated it. So encouraged by his agent and his publicist and stuff like that, he wrote a second book, which he also hated, which wasn't any good. And he wrote a third book, which wound up being this one. But I liked the outline that he told of the story he wanted to tell. Sounded really, really interesting, and I really, really want him to write that book. To find a way to go revisit that story premise and rewrite it and rewrite it so it's good enough for us to read, because it sounded really interesting. So I kind of enjoyed reading that little blurb that he did about his difficulties in writing a second book. As always, thanks for watching. As always, this is crap. And until next time, good hunting.